Hi, I'm Ryan from Amber. Today I wanted to get away from VCV Rack and modular in general and talk about, should I do it? I kind of want to do it. Ambience. Now, right off the bat, just a disclaimer, I don't really make strictly ambient music, and this video isn't about making ambient music per se. So if you're looking for something like that, I recommend checking out the channel Signs of Life. The link's in the description. He dives real deep into making ambient music and is really good at explaining it. What this video is really about is stealing some of that awesome texture and vibe to enhance the music you already write to give it just a different dimension. So I'll explain some of the methods that I use and play examples so you can get an idea of what they sound like. I've also timestamped the video, so if you want to, feel free. So this week was super busy because it's tax time. So most of my time in the studio this week was basically just working on things like textures and really mellow, relaxing spaces. When my brain is fried from other things, it's pretty much my default setting. I can just design some fun stuff and just zone out in the process. There was a lot of zoning out. One of the reasons I don't make ambient music is when I hear these really rich textures and wide open spaces, I have the tendency to want to fill those spaces with something. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely a place for ambient music that's just sort of sits there and does its thing. It's just not music that I enjoy writing. And if it feels like I'm shitting on ambient music for being boring or empty, I promise I'm not. I've tried to create long ambient tracks before, and it's a challenge. To make really good ambient track that's not boring but also not busy, it takes a good amount of talent and skill, so yeah, I'm not shitting on it. I just wanted to go over a few ways that I add ambient elements to my music that you might find useful. One of which I just discovered a couple of nights ago. So the first up, synthesizers. Because of course it's synthesizers. The first method I use is probably the easiest and the fastest to get you going, and that's using a synth. I like using analog synths just because it's easier to play and adjust settings to get more movement, but using a soft synth is just fine. There's just a few things you need to do to get set. So first, I'd set your attack somewhat slow. You can sort of fade into the notes and set your releases long. Experiment with the exact envelope you like and move on to the next thing, which is frequency. I like to keep it pretty low, and I do this just because at the end of the day, it's a pad or a drone that I don't want stepping on the rest of my piece. So you can also do this by adding an EQ to the finished track just to get rid of some of those high frequencies. You just definitely want to do it at some point because these synths can get really grand sounding and fill up the whole frequency spectrum, so you really need to keep them in check a little bit. After that, I like to add movement somehow. There are a few ways to do it. You can run it through some sort of tape emulation, which is my favorite, to get that wow and flutter. I use my shallow water pedal for this, and it's pretty great. You could also get one of the thousands of paid or free tape emulator plugins, and those work just as fine. Another way to get movement is to detune one of the oscillators just slightly. You could also add a delay, or one of my favorites is using an arpeggiator at a really slow rate. So it just sort of bleeps and bloops, and I'd make the direction random so you kind of don't know what you're going to get. So just hold down a chord and see what happens. And lastly, and obviously, add some nice spacey reverb to all of that, and you have yourself a pretty passable ambient pad or drone thing. I like to use my Big Sky pedal, but really any long-tailed reverb will do. Results will vary based on what sound you use as your sound source, but play around with it. The sky is sort of the limit here. The one I made sounds like this. And before I get to the next ones, if you have anything to add or correct me on, feel free to comment below. It's a super useful way for everyone to learn from everyone, and it helps create a really great community that we can all enjoy. So comment, and also like and subscribe to the channel if you find it useful or entertaining. Okay, let's get back on the... Get it? One way I like to add ambient texture is to add it straight onto the track. Let's start with a piano track and create a bus for it. On the bus, I'll add delay, chorus, more delay, reverb, and lastly, I'll pitch it all up. And by the way, this is just one of the infinite ways you can do this with the bus. This is just an example of the one I'm using right now. What's on the bus is entirely up to you, and you really have to take into account the track that you're writing and what sort of texture you want on it. But this way, it gives you a lot of control over the texture that you get. You can add in as much or as little as you want, and it will just play as you play. So you can record the bus as its own audio track and manipulate it even further if you want, chopping it up for chord changes or glitches, whatever you want. Here's an example. Next up, Small Winters. The last one I wanted to talk about is the one that I discovered just a few days ago, and I've been playing with it a lot. So far, it's been the most time-consuming of the three methods, but by far the most fun to play with, and also by far the most likely one to get you lost in creation in a good way. It's a plugin by Pure Magnetic called Small Winters. It's a plugin that lets you record up to 12 seconds of audio onto 3 separate tracks. Each track has its own loop points that can move across the recording, creating really interesting phrases and textures. The loops can take on a life of their own and add some pretty creative elements to your tracks. So once you've recorded your sections, you can play the plugin kind of like an instrument and get some really interesting results. I feel like I've only scratched the surface of this thing, but it smells good. so stupid. And if you don't mind some automation, you can automate all of the knobs in your DAW to create something very similar to an LFO that controls each of the knobs. It makes it sort of like using modular in the sense that it'll just kind of keep going on and on forever and changing. It's pretty cool. Another really nice thing about Small Winter is that you can use different sound sources for each of the 3 tracks. So for this example, I'm using the Juno 6 from Arturia. For the first track, I'm using a string sound. For the second, a Celeste. And for the third, I don't remember what I'm using for the third one, but it's something else. Once I get something that I'm happy with, I can print it and it will render an audio track of whatever I've created. So one of the issues I've run into this plugin though is that it pops a lot. The only workaround I found for this is using the band function on it and finding a frequency that you're happy with. It seems to work well enough for now. Small Winter is something that I'll probably keep going back to a lot because it's pretty versatile. It really feels like its own instrument, and you can make it ambient. But honestly, I'll probably just use it as much to write weird shit to listen to while I'm scripting YouTube videos as much as anything else. So creating these textures exactly how you want them can take a little time, but in the end, it's worth it. And the more you put into creating them, the less generic they'll sound, and they'll really give your track some life. And to show what I mean, here is a little snippet of a simple piano piece just by itself. And here it is with some texture. Now, obviously, I wouldn't be done here, and I'd want to EQ everything and probably alter it a little bit more, but it just goes to show you how much it can change a piece with really, really subtle changes. So that's all I have for you this time. Like I said, these are just a few of the many ways that you can add ambience to your tracks. I hope everyone has an awesome week, and if you do try some of these out, link it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys come up with. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.